Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dean's Chat, where we discuss all things podiatric medicine. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Jensen. I'm the Dean at the Arizona College of Podiatric Medicine and the host for the Dean's Chat podcast. Once again, I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Joanna Richey. Hi, Joe.
Hey, Jeff. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited about doing a different kind of episode for Dean's Chat today. You and I are going to answer common questions from the students as they prepare for clerkships.
Yes.
And so we have a whole list of questions that they ask us every week as they're approaching the match, if you will, for clerkships. So I think it's a great idea to do it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's such a fun opportunity, and this is perfect timing as students are starting to come in, trying to figure out how to get that schedule set up optimally for them in their fourth year. And I agree. What a great opportunity to do some Q&A on Dean's Chat.
Absolutely. Well, let me kick it off and ask you the first question. I mean,
All right.
students are coming in your office or coming in my office. They're looking for philosophies on picking externships. Where do you start with a student when they come in the room?
Yeah. It's a hard thing. It's like financial advice, right? It's personal because it's personal. And so I think some of the things that are hard is helping students figure out what the important questions to ask themselves are. Like we can't answer a lot of this for them, but the three big things that I try to help them start to narrow down some of their thought process and establish a framework is there specific locations that they are interested in? And I don't think that they need to focus on a particular geographic location, but do they also have people that they're bringing along with them? Because if you are a student that is single, you're not having to factor other people into your life as you are moving across the country all through the fourth year. And certainly not in terms of support systems for things like residency. But if you are a student that has other people that are coming on this journey with you, they are also important. And so having an opportunity to think about where the social support systems might be in terms of family or friends or particular areas of the country that would facilitate support to your important people in your life. There are so many excellent training programs. We've had some really great guests on that have talked about, factoring in some of these things. And I agree, it's hard to say, oh, well, you got to make sure you hit these top 10 programs. There are outstanding training opportunities all over the country. So trying to figure out the things that are important to you. And then the last one being, if you already know there's an area of interest, find the programs that fit that. If you know you want to do diabetic limb salvage, as you're going through the Casper CRIP website, you can look at the rotations that these residency programs offer. And so you want to make sure you're getting plastic surgery, vascular surgery, diabetic wound care, I think is pretty standard just in terms of the residency training requirements. But again, if for whatever reason that's not listed on the residency application, the Casper CRIP website, those are going to be good questions for you to ask when you go, or things that help you piece out what kind of programs you're looking for. But if you are much more interested in sports medicine or trauma or reconstructive surgery, then you can lean into that too and look for programs that support those kinds of niches. And if you don't know, then I tell students just go for places that you're going to get a nice variety and a big mix of training, which actually brings me to my question for you. How do you help students when they come in and they say, how do I know if I want to focus in a specific area, or should I just go broad? What are the ways that you help counsel students?
When students first come into the office, I tell them that I'm going to give them a playbook, so to speak, that is time tested and works. And so I always tell them that you have to look forward 15 years, 10 years. And at that point in time in your life, you may decide to change your practice situation, or your goals may change. But the number one priority going through your training is to get the best training you can to provide those options going forward. So what I will do typically is I'll ask them, I mean, are you interested in surgical training? Do you want the top surgical opportunity? And if they say yes at that point, I will take out a map and kind of walk all the way down from Washington State to Oregon to California, Arizona, Texas, Florida, all the way up the East Coast, all the way then through the Midwest, right? Michigan, Detroit, Denver, and I will highlight lots of programs that I think that are wonderful for them that oftentimes Arizona has a pipeline to, because a lot of these programs, like our students, they continue to take them. So with that in mind, I ask them to open up an Excel spreadsheet. They got to start somewhere, right? So if they
Yeah.
put 10 programs at the top that they really think they want, they don't even know, right? You don't know what you don't
Mhm.
know, but you got to
Yeah.
start somewhere. So you've put 10 programs that you've heard good things about and highlight it in green. Put 10 more programs in yellow that you've heard something about, but you're not sure. Or
Mhm.
maybe there's a geographical issue. And then the bottom group in red, you put programs that you don't know anything about, but they intrigue you, perhaps because of what you said, because of geographical location or clumping programs together. And once they do that, they do all the heavy work early because they're actually, investigating these programs. They're asking very specific questions about different programs. And if they really look at it from a broad perspective like that, by the time they go to apply for the match for the clerkships at the end of September, they don't have to make any snap decisions because they've done their homework. And so I ask them to do their homework early. But I also tell them, there's not all residency programs are created equal. Um, but by the same token, you can't go to 7 top programs in the country because you just burn out.
Yeah.
So sometimes you've got to lump programs together in different geographical areas, maybe whether it's Boston or Denver or Seattle or Portland or San Francisco, wherever you want to go, or Texas. It's really a challenge to put it all together. And when you start talking about the variables of family and support networks, it's quite an exercise. So
Yeah.
that's how I frame it to them. And then let them know I've got an open door policy and you're welcome to email me your Excel spreadsheet, or we can talk on the phone, or we can meet in person, because I just want them to have a plan going in. I've seen a few students in past years, they don't really know what they want, and it's the middle of September and they just wing it when it comes to applying for programs. And I don't think that's a good strategy.
Agreed. And it's hard because sometimes you may put all this pre-work into it. You find this perfect geographical, logistical map that you've figured it all out. And then the way that the months shake out, you don't get the order that you want. And then it's like a triaging of how do I move all these jigsaw pieces together. And so I agree, having kind of plan A, but I love your idea of the color coding. As a visual person, I love color coding, as I have all my colored highlighters literally right in front of me right now. So it's nice because, again, it helps them very quickly maybe move some of those pieces around as they are offered. Oh, we can't give you September, but we could offer you December, or vice versa, that they can have an idea in their mind of where these programs are, that they could move those pieces easier so that the logistics of that process maybe are more simplified. So I like that.
The one thing I didn't mention is I'll oftentimes start by saying you have to treat the fourth year as an educational experience.
Yeah.
And if you do that and learn as much as you can, all the chips will fall in your favor going forward. You can't really play a game. You're there to learn. There to learn as much as you can. And when you go to, you never want to be the smartest person in the room either. So if you go to some of these really good programs, they will train you up.
Yeah.
And the difference between your ability to interview for a top program in October is a lot different from where you're at in January. So,
Absolutely.
if they treat it like an educational experience, they'll maximize their everything from their learning
Yeah.
process to their opportunities for residency. So I think that's something some students lose sight of because they perceive it purely as residency pursuit.
I think that's fair. And I think it's also nice, as we've had several different residency directors on, and we've asked a lot of them the same question, like, does it matter the month that they extern? Overwhelmingly, everyone's like, no, it doesn't. Because as a residency program, you recognize that the student that's there in May is at a different educational point than the student that's there in November. And so it's not that, oh, if you didn't get those last couple months before interviews, it's you're not going to be at your best. That's not it at all. It's really a matter of, are you teachable? Residency programs want to teach you something. So to your point, fourth year is still education. They want to be able to teach you something. And I'll tell students often, if you feel like they keep asking you these questions and you don't know the answer, it's not necessarily that they're trying to be mean or hard. They're trying to gauge where you're at. And if you're here, they don't want to be teaching you down here because that's not giving you a benefit. So they're going to keep asking questions till they start to kind of get a gauge on where you are so they can actually teach you something. And so try not to be frustrated by that, because again, as a student, you feel like your job is to always have the right answer. And that isn't always what they're seeking in
Right.
residency as they're asking questions. It's not, hey, we expect you to know this and you don't. They may be asking really challenging questions, not with the intent that you know it, but getting a gauge of where to take the conversation to teach you something. So being humble, being teachable. To your point, you don't have to be the smartest person. You don't really want to be the smartest person in the room. And usually you're not, even if you think you are as a fourth year. Which brings me to my next question for you, or a common question that we will counsel students on. When we talk about pitfalls during externships, where do you see students go wrong? Or where do you see them run into problems?
Well, I think if you go right back to the beginning of choosing clerkships, I think at the Arizona College, we offer two clerkship opportunities at the end of their third year. So between March, April, and May, they can choose two of those months and go on a clerkship program. And I tell them, go for it, go to a high-end program, a very academic program at the end of your third year, because they're going to ask you the same questions that another program is going to ask you in October. And you get a lot of rope, so to speak, at the end of the third year in terms of your knowledge base, because the clinicians know you're still a third year student. So I think a pitfall, you're asking for pitfalls, is to kind of dip your toe in the water and not go to a program that you really want as a clerk at the end of your third
Okay.
year. And because you don't think you're going to be viable for that program. And that's just not true, adding on to what you just said about the months. So that's a first pitfall. Another pitfall, and we can go back and forth on this, is professionalism, Joe.
Yeah.
I feel strongly that you only get one chance to make a first impression,
Yep.
and sometimes that impression, as you know, is made in 30 seconds. And so to be great at all the things that don't require talent is super important, right? What are those things? Timeliness, professionalism in terms of how you handle yourself, how you dress, being a
Mhm.
little bit early. I oftentimes talk about the 3% rule. I tell the students, um, at the end of the day, everybody's working 10 hours a day. 10 times 60 is 600 minutes. 3% of that is 18 minutes or 20 minutes, give or take. If you go above and beyond the call of duty 3% of the time, like at the end of the day when everybody else leaves, go talk to the doc. Ask him if there's anything you can do to help him. Maybe he just got a consult on the floor that you can go help him work up. Maybe he just got an add-on you that you could participate in. So I like that 3% rule. And I've been using that for years, Joe. And I have students email me years after they've been through the school, even back when I was in Miami, and they say that 3% rule absolutely works. Just give a little bit above and beyond what
Yeah.
everybody else is doing, and it works. So the major pitfalls that I see are people got to be willing to work. I mean, you're there, and you got to be professional. So that's my 2 cents for now. Your
Yeah, I think
thoughts?
that's really good. I like that 3% rule as well. I think it's also amazing how much, to your point, the how do I be helpful, and asking the residents, because again, the residents often has, we've talked to some residents too on this show, the residents often have a lot of input. I know they certainly did at our program when we would interview students about, because the residents sometimes spend a lot more time with you as an extern than sometimes the attendings do. And it was always interesting when the attendings would have a perception of a student and the residents would have a very different experience. And as an attending, that was always a giant red flag, right? Like, you should be pretty consistent across your experiences. You could certainly have an off day or a bad experience, but when more than one resident is having a similar experience with you, that does speak volumes. And so asking the residents, how can I be most helpful to you while I'm here? Because they will tell you. And if their recommendation is just stay out of the way, that's fair, right? But you can still intuitively read the room. You can still figure out, okay, I noticed that the resident does this same thing every single time. So they don't want me to draw up medications or do these things, because maybe there's reasons that they're not to have students do that. But you could be there to make sure all the stuff is there, right? They have the local medications, they have the alcohol wipes, they have the syringes, because those little bits. I remember being a resident, and when you have a really helpful student, it's that moment where you're like, oh, you've made my life so much better. And that really helps you then be more connected to that student. Hey, why don't you help me come do this? And I'm going to let you do this now. And then maybe talking to the attending, hey, let's let this student has been great, let's let him suture, right? So you get to have these little opportunities. So the more you can find ways to be helpful, but not in the way, you don't want to be doing stuff you're not asked to do, or specifically there are reasons they don't want you doing it and you're doing it anyway, that definitely doesn't go over well.
No, I agree with you. It's interesting because residency directors will oftentimes call the schools, as
Mhm.
Dr. Don
Yeah.
Green does, and they're always asking about the students and who you recommend. And ironically, very rarely do I go to grade point average.
Mhm.
And our students are wonderful. I can give you examples of students that are, in from a pure grade point average are in the bottom third of the class that are getting top programs. So it's all
Absolutely.
over the board.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot to be said for it's a job interview,
Mhm.
clerkship. There's a reason they call them audition interviews,
Yeah.
sometimes. So I just think people need to be on their game, and it's hard. Back when I was a student, we only got 3 clerkship opportunities. I'm not sure how many you had.
We had 3, yeah,
Did you?
and when I tell the students that, their jaw just about drops, like, "How
Right.
could you decide?" You figure it out.
Right. But then if you think about it, Joe, we are on our game those 3 months.
Absolutely.
100%.
Yeah.
So if you start looking at the schedules today and students have an opportunity to do 6, 7, 8 clerkships, it's really challenging and it's stressful and it's physically taxing to
Absolutely.
be
Yeah, the
at
mental
your
game.
best all the time. So I recommend they really work hard, kind of clump some of the clerkships in the geographical area where maybe they get an apartment or somewhere to stay and they can stay
Mhm.
there for 2 months,
Yeah.
because moving every month is taxing in and of itself. And new
Yep.
hospitals, you and I have discussed that, new hospitals, new locker rooms, new electronic medical records. I mean, it really gets taxing for the students.
Yeah, and that mental load as you go from everything new in 1 month, and then you move, and then everything new again, and it is amazing how much anything that you can find that is consistent. A student was asking about bringing their pet with them, like, I don't know if these are great ideas or not, but I feel like that is something for me that will help ground me, and again, there are all kinds of options for doggy daycares and things that are out there that, you can make all of all of the situations you want to make work, you can find avenues and ways to facilitate that. And maybe having that companion with you really matters to help keep you grounded. And I fully support that for students. It just takes a little bit of planning. And as we discuss, what you don't want to do is then be like, well, I have to leave because I have to go get my dog, or I have to let my dog out, because those are going to be different logistical problems that you will have to navigate. And the same goes for family obligations. As a student, you don't want to leave a case early or leave something, unfortunately, good or bad, because you have something that you're like, oh, I want to go to my family thing. And this is not downplaying the importance of family, but to your point, you have one opportunity. And if this is a place that you, even if it's not a place that you really find yourself wanting to go, we have a very small profession. And I know when I was a faculty at a residency program, we would text each other from other, across the country. Hey, we heard this student was with you last month. What are your thoughts about them? And you never want to trash talk another program. That's one of the pitfalls I've seen students do, where it's like the moment where you're just like, just stop talking, because you can just totally, even if you think you're trying to, oh, I'm building this program up because I think they're the best, you never want to push anyone else down, including other students. Again, that doesn't make you look better. We as faculty are very adept at reading between those lines of one student trying to poke at the other one or trying to make someone look bad on purpose. Your best option in those situations is continue to try to keep your head and keep moving forward and find opportunities to not interact with that person. Because again, and Dr. Baker talked about this when we interviewed him, about the challenges when you're with this other person for a whole month. That's exhausting, that emotional, and to your point of the fatigue that can come. And when you have 3 or 4, that's taxing, but it's easier than 8 or 9, where that emotional fatigue of going through that, it is important for us to recognize that that is what our students are going through. So having the things in your life to restore and fill your cup back up so that you can show up as your best self, they absolutely matter.
Well said. So I have a question for you. And some of our guests on Dean's Chat have alluded to the priorities when it comes to, should I go to a great program in a location that is not desirable to me
Yeah.
or to anybody, or should they go try to do a residency in a place where they want to ultimately live? Your thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I think this is another one that's very individual. I do not think that you have to actually, I know you don't need to do a residency in the city that you want to live and ultimately practice. I think that is absolutely not a requirement whatsoever. We have seen successful people come from everywhere and move everywhere. So that is definitely not a requirement. So if that is a fallacy that is being kind of propagated, then we can absolutely put the kibosh on it for now, because it really doesn't matter where you practice or where you do a fellowship. Now, does it make it easier to network with people? Sure, because you are physically in a location, you may interact with more people. I think that that is fair. So what that says to me is, if you know, hey, I'm going to go to Baltimore to get training, but I want to come back to Arizona, keep your connections to Arizona and reach out. If there's a conference that's happening in Arizona, come to the conference and network during that. Connect to people on social media so that you have opportunities to still stay engaged with the community that you want to be in, but you don't physically have to be here. I think the question of trying to get not trying, but the goal being, you have 3 years to invest in learning, skill acquisition, and training. That is something that to me really should be a top priority in your life. But I think it's important to recognize that there are lots of things that impact how that's going to go for you. So I think some of the challenges that sometimes come down for students is, you want to take that 4th year to learn as much as you can, because residency is one of those times in your life where you can only do it once. It's your peak opportunity to learn as much as you possibly can, acquire skills, have someone teach you how to do specific things. And though that really needs to be the top priority during those 3 years. However, I think it's also really important to recognize that your success in those 3 years is impacted by the other factors in your life, the things that make you who you are. So when you're bringing someone with, if you're bringing someone with you, their happiness is also going to be a part of your experience. Because if you're constantly in the hospital feeling guilty or being shamed about how much you're working, that's going to impact you with additional stress. And we've had students that, unfortunately, they're wonderful students and they weren't wonderful residents. And it's not because they're not good. It's because the program wasn't good for the way that they learned best. They pick a program because somebody tells them that's what they should do, or they feel somehow pressure that that's what they should, the ultimate should word, that's what I should be doing. And I often will tell students to lean into their gut. Like, you'll go somewhere and you'll know within a half a day if this is not the program for you. But you won't know right away if it is the right program. And that's why those 1 month stretches are so valuable, is you'll start to get a gauge of, what do I need from a program for me in the way that I learn to be successful in learning skills and acquiring medical knowledge in terms of application to patient care. What do I need to do that? And again, we can't answer that for them. That's a very personal experience. And then be able to see that in a lot of different ways in terms of how residents interact with their attendings, how much repetition is there. Some students need a lot of the same thing over and over again. Some people just need to see things a couple times and have lots of time to study and get ready and prepare. And so there are different programs that support each of those, but very differently. So if you're someone that needs to see something a lot of different times, you don't want to go to a program that you're seeing it once or twice and you have time to prepare. You need to go somewhere where you are, as the resident, will be doing it a lot. And so kind of getting the opportunity to test that out over the months. And then from that framework, say, okay, of these locations that are going to give me the kind of training that I need, to the people that I'm bringing with me, where do you have support? Because I am going to be in the hospital more than I am not. And that's just the reality of what residency is. So where is this going to make the most difference for you to feel happy and supported? And then as a team, figure out what those solutions will look like. And I think that that, again, is very individual, but having a spreadsheet, as you talked about, I think is really useful to start that conversation. And as awkward as it might be to have those conversations with your partner, I think they're really important to help set both of you up for success. What are your thoughts?
Well, I agree. And there's so many moving parts to the process, even before you start layering on family issues. Some of the students have wife and kids, or husband and kids, and it's a challenge, Joe. And I think it's something that it's individualized. They need to navigate it. But I think that as faculty members, supporting them through that process and having discussions about it so that it is okay to realize that it's okay to make decisions that are impactful for your family, significant others at this time also.
Absolutely.
So I've got another
So
question.
I have another question real quick for you,
Okay.
if you don't
Okay.
mind.
Sure.
So you had brought up the GPA question,
Yes.
and we get this a lot too. What are your thoughts on GPA cutoffs? I know some programs it's like a hard stop. Other programs it's like we have to put something there, so we do. What are your thoughts about the GPA question?
So I think there's only we've run into a few situations where students that were really good students, we thought were good students, for one reason or another, didn't have a high enough GPA and for that program. And sometimes a phone call to the residency director makes a difference. But other times it's, it's okay. Maybe that program's not for you at that point. I think it's interesting because programs are challenged. Should they go GPA? Should they do class rank? And I've said for many, many years that in Arizona, for example, we have a smaller class and we're more selective with admissions. And so our GPAs are such that not everybody's got a 3.8 GPA, yet they're phenomenal students and they're going to make phenomenal residents and practitioners. So I try not to get too worried about that. I mean, there's so many great programs out there that we can send students to. If there's one or two programs that have a GPA that's prohibiting them from getting there, it's okay. I mean, not every program is going to be perfect for you, and maybe that's one of them. I don't know how else to say it,
Yeah,
really.
and I think it's also a nice kind of gauge for setting realistic expectations. I don't think it should be a limit,
Right.
right? It's not a limiting factor. But where I have seen students sometimes go wrong is they try to do the you shoot for the moon and you'll land in the stars, so they just go all out. And what you have to remember is that those programs that maybe do have a higher GPA, either requirement or just that's just who shakes out in the pile, you are putting yourself in a pile of different cohorts that when decisions, hard decisions sometimes have to be made, it may come down to something like that. It may not. And because you don't have control over who else is in the bucket with you, it is a gamble. And so if you're going to make a gamble, don't make all of your options for your match gambles, because that's when, again, you just may have misread the room, or you just didn't land where you hoped you would land. And I have seen students that had a 2.7 GPA on externships blow everyone out of the water in terms of how much they knew, how well they performed, their professionalism on the rotation. They were exceptional. And then you find out the GPA again later on, you're like, wow, I'm kind of shocked by that, but also don't care because they were outstanding.
See, that's
But you
my
don't
point.
know who's in that group with you.
Yeah, that's true. That's my point usually. If you can get a foot in the door and do a clerkship and you do great work, they're never even going to ask you what your GPA is. And so I look at it that way also. Um, I mean, I can tell you when I was a clerkship director at the North Colorado program, if we brought in students and we're doing our best to bring in the very best students we could, once they came and spent a month with us, we never looked at their grades again
Yeah.
because it was
And
all
I do
about
think some of
fit.
that might be a little different now. Because
Yeah.
again, at some point you have to have a deciding factor. But again, I don't think students should limit themselves, but I want to be careful and cautious in that advice, because you just don't want to miss your opportunity by just clearly putting yourself into a different group, if
Right.
that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. But then, and so let me give you another side of the coin there. What if you, in your clinical work, you're fabulous and all your four curriculums, kind of pillars, if you will, surgery, pod med,
Mhm.
gen med, biomechanics, you have straight A's. And the only thing pulling you down was biochemistry your first year,
Mhm.
pathology your
Yeah.
second, and just for lack of a better term, maybe microbiology and immunology. What if you got C's there, but you were a rock star everywhere else? Those grades in those classes should not preclude you from getting a top program,
I agree. And that's where I don't think it's a matter of something that should limit you.
right?
Again, and it's so interesting having had worked with students as a faculty in a residency program for about 8 years. It's funny the stuff that as a student you think, and then in the execution of it. But we had students that, and again, the details of where they came from and all of that are irrelevant. But that were very high, 3.9, 4.0 GPAs, that really couldn't answer basic micro questions. So you have to, as an attending, ask the question then, you know, okay, so this particular student has a number attached to them, but clearly didn't, they were either really good at memorizing content and dumping it on an exam and being done, or maybe there was something else nefarious happening behind the scenes there, right? Compared to another student that has a number attached to them that can answer all my questions. They may not get everything right, but you can see the way they process information. You can see the way that they think about things. You can hear their honesty in their answer of, I cannot recall it. This is my favorite statement. I cannot recall it this time, but I will look it up and get back to you. And they do. They look it up. They get back to you the next minute they see you. Oh, Dr. Richey, I looked that thing up and this is what I found. Or they're sending me emails with articles of like, oh, I went down the rabbit hole of like looking into all of this. That is a student that I want to engage with, right? That is a student that has shown me that they're teachable, that they may not have the right answer, but they're willing to work hard to get there. That grit, that determination, I'll take that any day. But what again is hard is you have to get to that point to be able to show it. And so it is hard because some programs, it's like a hard stop. Like they're just not going to take an extern with these cutoffs. And so as much as students can invest in that opportunity to bring their GPAs up as much as they can to get that foot into the door, I do think, again, it's one of those situations where the grade matters because of the cutoffs, but the content, the understanding, that's really what matters. So don't let it limit themselves, but it is a reality of the process.
Right. You know, you're bringing up another thought I had. So often students start ranking programs and they get offered two programs that they really like for the same month.
Yeah.
And they're just torn. And
Yeah.
they call you and they call me and they call Dr. Violin and Dr. Jenkins and Dr. Toms, and we're all giving them similar response. I think that sometimes you can't go wrong, right? You pick a program and you just go to the other program and say, look, I still want to come to your program. I'd love to go to your program. I just can't come that month.
Yeah.
And it's okay whether you go left or right at that point. Because students, they'll spend an entire weekend just beating themselves up over that decision. And oftentimes you'll end up getting the programs you want to go to because there's so many clerkship opportunities. They just might not be in the exact monthly order that you want them, which is okay. Not that you want to be trucked going across the country back and forth, but in general, it really does work to the student's advantage. And every year, just so our students know, there's thousands of clerkship openings at the various residency programs around the country that don't go filled. So there is tremendous, tremendous opportunity to get great learning experiences with programs that will serve you well as a resident and set you up for the future of being a tremendously successful practitioner.
And the other thing on that is when you're driving, if you're going to be driving to various locations, again, a half day, you don't usually get to go in the operating room because all the paperwork and stuff that goes with it. There are things that you won't be able to experience, but to have the opportunity to feel what it's like to be in that residency program, even just going to a grand rounds in the morning, maybe there's a 6 a.m. conference you can go to, getting to hear how the attendings interact with the residents. Because again, we all learn differently. Some people love that like constant being put on the spot because it keeps them on their toes, keeps them engaged. Great, go see what those opportunities are like. Other people, that's the experience where they like close down and they like, that's not how they learn the best. So maybe that's not the right program for you. So anytime you can build in these little opportunities to visit a program, even a half a day can make a big impact. Because let's say you don't get to extern there, but then you interview and the question will always come up, why didn't you extern with us? And sometimes it's literally that I just wasn't able to get the month that fit with all the logistics of trying to get all, from one point to another, but I was able to make a visit. And then you talk about all the things you love during that visit. We took residents that were not externs because they were exceptional during their interview. And so that visit can just reinforce that you were interested and engaged and you were in it. You just didn't get the month. Like it just didn't shake out that way. And again, programs are usually pretty understanding about the logistical part of that.
I think you use two terms there that are so important. Interested and engaged will take you a long way.
Yep.
I also tell students, never again are you going to have an opportunity to travel around the country, go to hotbeds of podiatric medicine and surgery, and rub shoulders with leaders in the profession that could truly, truly influence your career as a mentor, and set the stage for success. Because you see it over and over again. Students that come out of certain programs, they get a leg up because of their mentors and the opportunities that are provided for them. And I think that's something that students got to consider also if they really, really want to reach the highest levels of the profession. Some of those programs will make it easier, let's say. It's always possible, but some programs make it easier.
Absolutely. It's amazing how much the support system of your residency, including your co-residents, will continue through the whole part of your career of setting you up for the things that you want to do. And again, because we don't all have the same interests in terms of where our careers will go, it's hard to make blanket statements for students. It's very individualized. And so I guess the other thing is not being afraid to trust your own intuition about what you want for your life. Like, what do I want my future career to look like? Do I want to be in academics? Do I want to be doing these types of activities? Or is this the kind of practice that I want to build? And who are the people that are doing that practice? And what does that look like for them? Where did they go to residency? And mirroring some of those mentors and networks. I think that's a really good point.
Absolutely. I've got another topic for you. Every year there's 1 to 3 couples in classes,
Yeah.
I always tell people, at orientation, I say, your future spouse might be in this room. You just never know. And sure enough, every year people start dating, they get to that 3rd year. It's like, okay, how are we going to do this? And what's the plan of attack? So they often end up in my office, and I look at geographical areas at that point.
Yep.
I say there's a ton of residencies in Florida, lots of residencies in Southern California, lots of residencies in Detroit, Michigan, and there's other areas too. But you all don't have to do the same programs, but you can be in a reasonably close geographical environment. So there's so many neat options there, and it's not as hard as you think. I mean, we've seen students like I even interviewed Ryan Waldall and Laura Truby. They're up in Michigan now.
Yeah.
I think Laura's at Genesis and Ryan is at Central Michigan, and they bought a house equidistant between the 2 programs,
Yep.
and they're making it work. So
Yeah.
there's opportunities for couples too, because I know that's a major stress point for them when they start thinking about clerkship opportunities.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And, it's even one of those situations where if it doesn't pan out that you're even in the same, 2-hour radius of each other, you can still kind of think geographically. Like if you're on, the West Coast and you're going to stay in the Northern California region, there are tons of programs there. And maybe you can't physically live in the same house because of, the travel prohibits that. But you could still be close enough that when you do have off time together, that it's easy enough to get together and you're not having to spend half your day flying across a country. Because I do genuinely believe when you have 2 people that are willing to invest in each other to make it work, but like really to say we're committed to this working, it will work. There is no doubt in my mind that 2 people that both say that, it will work. But then you layer into all the barriers of how to make it work, and that's when it starts to erode a little bit. Whereas if you don't have 2 people that really feel committed to making it work, it doesn't matter where you live. There's always going to be somebody's on call, and you're on call here and I'm on call there. It's just going to be challenging. So regionally, just not taking out the flying equation, because you lose travel time, you lose daylight savings time, and the cost is whatever. The cost is what it is. But your time is your most valuable asset, especially as a resident. So that's the thing. However you can set your life up to achieve common time together, that's really where the opportunity sits. And there are so many incredible programs clustered in certain, you named a couple of key geographic locations that, again, I have not seen it become an issue that's the reason couples don't make it.
I agree with you. I bring it up because while on the surface, it seems like a daunting task and perhaps insurmountable, it's very doable. That's my point for couples. It doesn't matter what college you're from. When I was in Miami, we had 9 couples come out of one class.
Wow. The love connection down in Miami.
What's in the water?
Yeah.
I agree with you. So yeah, it never surprises me when I see couples start come together in classes. And then inevitably the third year comes and I try to quell their stress by telling them, hey,
Yeah.
this is doable. A lot of people have done it. You can do it too.
Yep.
So
Definitely.
that works good. So Joe, we've been talking about great advice for people, students that have passed boards part 2 and they're getting ready to choose their clerkships. What advice do you have for students that are just starting podiatric medical school or perhaps in the second year that they can do now to start thinking about preparing themselves for the best opportunities going forward? That's a fair question.
Yeah. And second year, it's funny, second year, I think for school and for residency, and I don't want to make this sound bad, but it's kind of the low point, right? Like you're far, I made the joke to the students, whether it's a bad joke or not, but you're far enough in, you don't want to quit, but you're still far enough in or farther enough to go that it feels so far away, right? Like it's that middle part that's just hard. And I feel like second year of residency is similar, where you've gotten through the first year where everything's new and exciting and all these outside rotations, and now you're just kind of in it. So my motivating statement to students in their second year is you're going to get there, and third year is loads more fun. So it's not as far away as it feels. You're really only like 9 months away, not 2 years and 9 months or whatever it looks like. It's much closer than it feels. So hang in there. The other advice that I have is I think it's a great time to visit programs when it makes sense for you. If you know you're going to go back home for a holiday or for a break or something, call a program and just say, hey, I'm going to be in the area. Could I come in to your grand rounds, or could I come in for a half day or a day, again, depending on how much time you have available. If you're driving up the coast to go home or down the coast to go home, stop to as many places as you can reasonably fit into your travel schedule to make those opportunities to help oh, I definitely want to go back to that program. Or, yeah, I think I got enough of what I needed to know from that program. And it just helps you then sometimes narrow down some of those difficult decisions if you're offered 2 programs of the same month, or programs that maybe start to move down that spreadsheet a little bit because they weren't as high as what maybe you had thought based on what you hear from other people. Because again, it's such an individual thing. You may talk to your upperclassmen and they may all, give you great advice about their experiences, but they are their experiences. And you, as a different human with different factors that make you who you are, may have a different experience, and that's okay. And so you lean into the things that work for you and how you're going to get the most out of your residency program. But it's hard to know that until you've had that experience.
And it's a fine line between, taking care of business first and second year, studying, taking exams,
Yeah.
doing well. And it's hard to not let your mind float forward to the future. And then we all did that, and our students do that also. So I try to reassure them that we have an entire process that we start in your second year that prepares you for clerkship opportunities. And we have the residency fair. We just had one a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And it's so fun to watch our old students that are residents at programs come back to the residency fairs
Yeah.
and represent their program. And it's so funny, Joe, because I can imagine that same student 3 years ago being in that
Yep.
same position, going to the residency fair. So there's a process, and sometimes you just got to work through the process and not get
Yep.
too anxious about it. The best thing you can do for the future is take care of business today and then worry about tomorrow later.
Yeah. And avoidance breeds more anxiety. I think that's again, any students that already suffer from some anxiety, the more you put things off, the worse it actually starts to feel. And so little tiny steps that you can make, just to your point, just put 2 programs on a spreadsheet. That's it as a second year. Like, hey, these are 2 programs I want to know more about. And that's it. Like, just start collecting. These are 2 cities I think would be fun to live in, right? Like, just start very small, because you don't have to figure it all out. And again, when you think of it, remembering what it was like to be a student, and in that moment where it just feels incredibly overwhelming, like all of these decisions that you're having to make, and you just don't even know where to start small, start with a city, start with a program. And then you can, from there, start to get a little more information, and that will inherently breed new questions that, oh, ooh, well, maybe I'll look at that program. And then you just start, the process will start to happen. But the more you put it off, and to your point, then if you're trying to do it all very last minute, that's very stressful and very overwhelming. So I guess that's another good second year piece of advice is just start small. Just start talking to your upperclassmen. Hey, what the people that you already know, where have you been? What did you like? What did you not like? What do you think are good questions to ask? And then that will start you down your own little rabbit hole journey of figuring out where you want to go.
Absolutely. That's great advice. The last thing I was going to mention is I was living in San Francisco for school, overlooking the city. Is so beautiful, going out for sushi and things all the time. And then when I got my residency program, I was moving 2/3 of the way across the country to Detroit, Michigan. And I never imagined myself moving to Detroit, Michigan, but I did it for the training opportunity that was afforded. And so you really can't go wrong, because what I learned is that I could have easily stayed in Detroit and had an entire career there. We love Detroit. It's beautiful. And I think that's true of a lot of areas around the country. You don't know what it's like until you're there, and then you start to feels like home after a while. Next thing you
Yeah.
know, you're setting up shop in that city. So there's nothing to be afraid of, really. It all works out.
And you don't know until you go, right? Like, when I did my externships, they were all primarily West Coast. And in fairness, I didn't actually think that I was going to end up at any of those places, because I was kind of a home girl, for lack of a better term. And you go and you experience, and suddenly you realize how much all of the different things that you love about something that you didn't even know because you had never had the experience. Um, and then it becomes harder to then, okay, of these two amazing locations, like now what, right? So again, it's nice to kind of have that spreadsheet to just start going through those questions.
Yep, I think so. I know I
But
like
you don't know
spreadsheets.
unless you go.
That's 100% true. Well, Joe, this has been a fabulous discussion. I think I touched base on all the different points that I usually get asked when it comes to clerkship
Yeah.
choices. Is there anything else on your list?
No, the only thing that just popped in my head on that note is, and also to your point of the fatigue part, and you're constantly on, it's like a month-long interview. And I do remember the stress that came with that. It's funny, as you start to think back, like all the things that start to kind of resurface. But the other amazing opportunity, and all my students know I'm very much the silver lining optimist person, but the other thing to remember, it's very rare in industry that you could go live somewhere across the country for a month at a time, and then just, if you didn't like it, no problem, you're moving on. And if you love it, hey, you may have the opportunity to come back. But indulge a little bit in living in this city, see what it's like. So to your point, like move into San Francisco, like I went to so many shows and restaurants and art museums, and as much culture as I could possibly soak up, because you realized at the time we didn't really have some of those things as much here in Phoenix. And I loved that scene. And so then when I went to Seattle and I went to Portland and some of these other places, it starts to like set up, okay, what do I want to check out in this city? And then it's also important, because then when your residents ask you, so what did you do over the weekend? They don't want you to say, I sat home and studied all day. Again, students kind of think that's what they want to say, but they want to know that are you really wanting to live here? So if you say, oh yeah, I went and did X, Y, or Z, it's fun talking points, because if you say you studied, they're going to ask you what you studied, and then they're going to go down the study rabbit hole, right, and ask you more questions. So let's talk about something fun that you did that was exciting and engaging, that's not medicine, that you have to be put on a spot academically, and allow you to engage with the residents or faculty attendings in the human way. And again, makes you a more interesting, well-rounded person.
Yeah,
Highlight your
I'd
unique
rather talk
attributes.
about Stinson Beach and Mount
Yeah.
Tam and Sausalito than what I studied that weekend.
Yeah. The Chihuly exhibit at the Fine Arts Palace. Like, yes, let's talk about that.
There you go. Well, Joe, this episode's been full of great advice for students around the country that are approaching clerkship choices. So thanks. I think we gave some good information, tested information, if you will. So thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for doing the Q&A. I think these are always really fun. And I know, like you said, across the country, the questions are similar. I know we've both been at different universities, but the questions are pretty universal. So
Absolutely. Well, to all of our listeners out there, whether you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcast, we'd love a 5-star rating, but also some comments perhaps. And also, if you're watching on YouTube, we'd love for you to become a subscriber. I do have a Dean's Chat cup for you, Joe. We'll
I've got mine
exchange.
too.
Oh, cheers. All right. I guess we're
Cheers.
set. All right. Bye-bye, everybody. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.